A sea sponge. He thought to himself, can it be true that I'm not in a dream? Can it be true that there's a real chance here, if it's only 1 in 1,000, of trying the great experiment? His mind whirled back to this, and that good omen which had come to him on his journey to Glastonbury. To feel free of all compulsion, to feel the physical caress of air and water and earth upon his life, as he earned his living a free man among free men, the stupidity of society broken up. If he could only know it for 1 year. Through every vein in his warm body rushed wave after wave of excited thought. He remembered a hideous phallic scrawl which he had seen on his way to Glastonbury in a public lavatory at Exeter, the sight of which had given him a sudden loathing for the human race. It's restraint, he thought, that makes people like that. Free them, free them! Free life from every compulsion, and people will be naturally kind and gentle and decent. Red Robinson, while Dave was speaking, had got quite deep into a dialogue with Sally Jones, as they lay side by side on this patch of bracken. Sally was now beginning to express not only admiration for his mental qualities, but in her own sweet roundabout way, a wish that their position on the hillside were not so exposed. Let's go to Bulwark's Lane, Sally was just saying with a delicious gleam in her eyes. The party's idea was, said Dave Spear, my idea was, or to be absolutely correct, Persephone's idea was, that we should get the town council to offer bigger rent for the grounds where Crow's new factory is than Crow's has ever paid. But it won't be only that land that we will offer to take. We'll get the town council. At this point, Paul Trent's excitement at the chance of realizing a dream about which he had thought night and day since he lost the fifth form essay on freedom at Penzance by advocating free love became so intense that he remembered the name of his first nurse, a name he'd forgotten for 20 years and had tried again and again to recall. The woman was called Brocklenhurst, and he was now repeated to himself this harmless name several times over, the name of a 30-year-old corpse buried near Ashbury Camp in Cornwall, and now serving as a eureka of anarchistic joy upon the top of Chalice Hill. We'll get the town council, went on Dave Spear, and that really means we'll get Gerd, for he does just what he likes with them, to rent from Lord P the whole of this Glastonbury property. And we'll bribe Lord P into this by giving him a much larger rent than he'd been getting from the tradesmen. Why, all High Street belongs to him, except the Abbot's Tribunal, which goes with the ruins. Once in the position of lease landlord for the whole of the town, the council could get rid of all opposition and start a cooperative commune. It would have its factories, it would have its own retail shops, though the ruins belong to the nation, or to the church, I forget which, Chalice Hill, Glastonbury Tor, Burrell Hill, all belong to Lord P's estate. And though, of course, Gerd couldn't buy the land, if the council got a long lease, it would come to the same thing. He'd have the right, that is, the council would have the right, to admit visitors, or not to admit them, as it pleased. The ruins would remain, of course, but they'd remain as church property or national property, whichever they are, in the midst of our commune. They'd be a little island of medievalism in the most modern city-state in the world. Paul Trent sat straight up, once more, upon the extreme tips of his buttocks. He rubbed back his brown hair with both his hands. Uncle hinted to me that I'd found things pretty interesting down here, he said. And goodness gracious, I certainly have. Mercy me! What good luck that he told me to come. Of course, said Dave. I have not had time to get any definite word from Gerd yet. It all depends on Gerd. He may have to help the council with money on January 1st if they can't afford Lord P enough out of their local taxes. Yes, it all depends on Gerd. But when I talked to him about it a few days ago, he seemed interested. At least I thought he was. But I always feel awkward and uneasy with the Gerd. I don't know why. I feel as if I were looking down a precipice where ferns and roots and grasses protrude, but where you can't see the bottom. Do you have any feeling of that sort, Red? The man from the Scilly Islands took this question addressed to their companion as a deliberate piece of irony. But he was totally wrong. Red Robinson's opinion of Crummie's father, uttered in the attentive ears of his two fellow conspirators, showed that to him, at all events, there was no guile in the question. Ged's an old humbug. That's what Ged is. But he's a hove of money. No more high deer of money as Bloody Johnny got than my boot soles has. He's struggling to ruin himself as hard as you or I and trying to better ourselves. And that's saying a lot. The foreman leered at Dave as much as to say, we know what's a good thing you, Mike, of being a communist. Did any one of these three conspirators to establish a Glastonbury commune realize their deep psychic luck in having let their idea escape upon the air for the first time on the summit of Chalice Hill? Not one of them. And yet to the invisible naturalists of Glastonbury, commenting curiously upon the strange history of the place, it must have been apparent that they were led to select this spot for the inauguration of their wild scheme by some kind of instinct. It was at any rate in a voice full of solemn intensity that Paul Trent now inquired point-blank of his two companions whether they wanted him to be their intermediary with the great Glastonbury landowner, and Dave and Mr. Robinson delayed not to make it clear to him that this was precisely what they did want him to do. As a lawyer, Dave said to him, you'll realize better than we do what arguments to use. But everyone knows how badly Lord P is in need of money these days. And of course the council has the power to raise the local taxes. And of course the mayor, in so important a matter, would be prepared to advance a good big sum of the council's security. We ought to be able to offer him at least half as much again as Philip Crow can afford. The man must agree. He can't help agreeing when it's a question of so much money. It may just tide him over these difficult days. It makes a pretty enough title, misters, said Red sarcastically. But I think, if you arst me, that when Christmas comes we shall be sitting on our bloody arses just as time has now. And that blasted Crow, you must excuse a workman's feelings, Mr. Spear. Sailing his airplanes just the same. 'Tain't as easy as you misters seem to think to humble these here capitalists. They want lead put in them. That's what they want. A few ounces of lead in their tin digging bellies. That's what would settle 'em. Set 'em up against a wall and pump some good lead in them. Still feeling spiteful, Mr. Robinson? Said the man from the Scilly Islands. Well, I'll do my best, Mr. Spear, and this landowner of yours. When do you want me to see him? Does he live around here? When will you have a definite offer ready for writing for me to show him? And what have I better talk to Gerd? When should I do that? Shall I go around to his house after dinner tonight? Dave nodded eagerly, his blue eyes radiant. Yes, yes, he whispered, as if they were already in the anteroom of Lord P. By all means, go round to Gerd tonight. I don't think I'll go myself. He doesn't like a lot of people fussing about him. Better be quite frank with him about your being an anarchist and so on, and about the comrades in Bristol being so keen. Better tell him, though, that it wasn't their idea. Tell him it was my wife's. He's a great feminist, Gerd is. And Dave grinned like a schoolboy. While this conspiracy against him was going on in the summit of Chalice Hill, Philip Crow, with the Taunton road contractor and a land surveyor from Evergreech at his side, was standing between Lake Village Field and the rain-swollen river. The Childless Robber band from Red's Alley, oh God, and from Paul Trent's back room had left their friend number 1 garden fence and had advanced in loose formation across the big airplane meadow to see what was going on. Here come the little rascals again. With the Evergreech surveyor made his measurements, and while the Taunton contractor with notebook and pencil lost himself in his calculations, Philip was left alone with his own thoughts. He was leaning upon one of those many walking sticks of the Elms umbrella stand that lived under the matriarchal rule of Tilly's umbrella. He was following with his eyes the building of the bridge, at present more imaginary than the eel bridge or the sword bridge of the legend, which was to take his tin across the Brew. From where he stood, he could see dimly through the sun-smitten mists the vague outlines of Pumperlee's Bridge on the road to Street, where John had had his vision of the falling sword of the British king. The mist-enveloped sun was luminous enough to cover all the meadows around him with a rich glow. This glow became pure yellow light when Philip, hearing the voice of the children approaching him, turned away from the 2 men and looked westward. A small Lombardy poplar stood up, darkly outlined in the midst of yellow luminousness, and Philip could see a dark bird of some kind. It was really a 6-month-old rook, perched on a swaying twig on top of the little tree. The rook was heavy, and the twig kept bending under its weight, so that in order to retain its balance, it was compelled to flutter with its great wings every now and then. It was Philip's long motionlessness that alone had allowed it to settle so near a human being. It was at the moment when Philip saw the rook fly off with a terrific flapping of its wings and with an angry caw that he observed 3 children, a little boy and a little girl, holding a small child by the hand, standing upon 300 yards away and watching intently the curious movements of another little girl who was apparently approaching him by the furtive method of running from tree to tree. The child had now reached the poplar from which the rook had just flown, and Philip was able to detect her tumbled brown hair and rough gray skirt peeping out from the poplar's trunk. He took a cautious step or 2 in the direction of the tree. "It's all right, child," he called out. "What is it? Is it a game you're playing? Come here and tell me. I won't hurt you." Thus spoke the instinctive father in Philip, for he had been quick to recognize the little daughter of Blackie Morgan. The effect of his call was twofold. It sent the 3 other children scampering off at top speed towards the safety of number 1's fence, while it caused Morgan Nellie, in order to prevent herself from yielding to a similar panic, to cling tightly to the poplar trunk with both her thin arms. It was thus that Philip found his only child when he reached the tree. Her forehead was pressed against it, and her fingers were frantically clutching its bark. He began to speak caressingly the moment he approached her, for he was touched by the look of those thin arms. And when he reached the tree, he did what he was perhaps the wisest thing he could have done. He sat down with his shoulders against it, so that the back of his cap almost touched her clasped hands. And I'm going to end it there today. Till next time, see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.